Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Ben Warner. I lead product marketing here at Privado.ai. We're happy to have you here today for our webinar. This is part two of a series on website privacy. Today, we're focusing on risk monitoring and remediation. We have here a managing partner at FLLR Consulting, Dan Harms, and one of our senior engineers here at Privado.ai, Ojaswa Sharma. So we're excited to have you here today to talk through some of the really key things that are causing a lot of risks and issues on websites that are leading to, potential lawsuits or privacy violations. And we have got some real experts here to go through, these very prescient topics. So I think we've got 95 people here now. All right, so just some housekeeping items. So this is being recorded, and we'll be collecting, fielding questions throughout the session. So feel free to ask any questions in the chats during the session. We'll try to answer them either during or at the end. And yeah, I'll kick it over to Dan to kick us off.
Very good. Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you to the Privado team for allowing me the opportunity to join and help support the website privacy series. I'm excited for today's topic. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in here. Setting the stage for today's topic, website compliance, CMP, cookies, the user experience, all of this is so topical across today's market for a number of reasons. And we'll cover this today, and we'll get into some pragmatic and practical examples of how you can assess your program, the tooling, how do you apply governance, what are some best practices on keeping your websites away from the eyes of the compliance and regulatory bodies that continue to be out there searching websites. If we zoom out here just for one moment, the regulatory reality check. If we look at it from a macro level, from the EU side here, yes, with GDPR, there's heavy fines that have been recorded. So we see here on the left, just over almost $5.5 billion worth of fines. We've seen direct targeting against folks like Meta and some of the large technology providers here. But more specifically across the US, once more, the topical nature of enforcement actions, which we've recently seen in the past, 3-4 months with two big headline enforcement actions under the CPPA, as well as some of this coming out of the FTC with unfair deceptive acts and practices on this side, really narrowing the focus in on things around dark patterns, consent manipulation here, symmetry of choice, how are you presenting clear, concise actions from a banner, a no banner, preference center language, and really what's happening behind the scenes. The most common issues we see, again, my space here where we help support hundreds of clients of standing up privacy technologies across the space and governing and providing managed services. There's a couple of items that stick out, I'd say are the big rock issues here. One, dark patterns. Well, again, from the enforcement actions we've seen as of late, things like symmetry of choice, basic stuff. Do you have an accept all and a reject all button? Again, that's symmetry of choice to the consumer and that experience modal from a consent banner or the preference center itself. Undisclosed data sharing. Who are the third parties in which you're sharing data with downstream? This comes down to things like classification and categorization of cookies. And once more, understanding those third parties that are active from a script and a cookie and pixel perspective across your web properties and how that information is being shared and the consent mechanism that's being placed up front on that. Invalid consent, listen, I think it's unintentional from a lot of companies on how they've designed or set up their CMP and cookie banners across their websites here. Sometimes these fail on the side. They're incorrectly configured from things like a tag manager and what's being fired from the backend on the GTM side here, what's being placed directly into the source code of the website itself. All things you have to build proper governance around. Unfortunately, there's a lot of tracking without consent. Again, the unintentional aspects of this here, just poor governance across these programs, to where new cookies and marketing teams are actively updating their site here, new campaigns, there's audience segmentation, all the back end work to get granular analytics on products and go to market and your services don't always make it across the chain to the privacy team or from a digital governance perspective here. Once more, what's actually happening and who's controlling these actions week over week, and who's kind of maintaining oversight across the program. If we zoom in a bit more here, if I had to kind of tag a number of what we define as high risk tracking technologies, really, this isn't an extensive list by any stretch, but again, kind of the three core kind of culprits we see day in and day out on our side. Google Analytics and things like Google Tag Manager, which we'll explore in a bit further session here as we get down our webinar today. But Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics, we've seen actions out of Germany as of late here, essentially prohibiting Google Tag Manager from firing without explicit consent, and the data transfer concerns that kind of tie into that as well. But again, often overlooked just core Google Analytics, whether it's GA3, GA4 on this side here. Oftentimes, analytics is still firing across websites, even with an active CMP embedded or deployed across one or multiple web properties across the board here. Again, unintentional on that side by most teams. I don't think anyone's explicitly taken nefarious practices and trying to collect more information here. We understand the regulations, we understand the law, but again, sometimes these things sneak through. And unfortunately, this is where we're seeing a lot of these CIPA violations come from. Dead center of the page here, the metapixel, Facebook pixel on the side. Again, very common as you think about data sharing across the board here. Sometimes these pixels are unmanaged, or marketing teams are placing these inside of their Adobe launch, their Google Tag Manager, things like Telium here, to fire across the page and start collecting all these insights with their agreements. But unfortunately, the tags are not being managed. So even with the proper consent mechanism, that is not being tied back to the tags effectively downstream in the Google Tag Manager, or again, whatever the tag manager of choice may be. But again, essentially exposing these to be ungoverned across the board. Huge concern for most companies here. You have to make sure these are being bought with an active consent mechanism. And on the right-hand side, kind of sneaking up on this and making a large resurgence today, BPPA. So essentially the blockbuster bill, old 1988 law here around rental histories and sharing viewing information across the board. But again, making a resurgence as we see for clients who are collecting analytics in their videos or screens that are actually playing information across their websites here. Those analytics, those trackers must be governed from a consent mechanism perspective. So again, understanding again at the core what's firing across your website, the analytics, the trackers, the scripts, the tags, the pixels, etc. What is on your domain is kind of the foundation of core governance for most clients. If we move forward here, something else that oftentimes sneaks up with us is things around session replay. So think about the cookies and scripts that are recording user interactions, navigations across the board. I think my screen went out, but there we go. User interaction across websites, how they're navigating the page, how long they stay on the page for. All those analytics, again, that drive engagement from your segmentation, your audiences that you've been engaging with here. There's inherent risks with that as well. So from a compliance perspective, do you have the clear disclosures inside of your preference centers or your cookie banners on what's actually happening on your website? The more clear, concise, transparent you are in these notices, again, provide more holistic protection for your team. If we look at program governance, so what is the defense strategy? There's a lot of scary stuff out there when you think about your websites. By no intention are we trying to fearmonger here about all the bad things that can happen. And again, the unintentional oversights that seem to carry over from business to business. Not the case for everybody. Of course, there's great practices that are out there. But what does good governance look like? And really the focus of today's discussion here. One, there's a phenomenal set of tooling across the marketplace today, especially with tools like Privado that take the technology a bit further than just doing things like a website scan or some pre-classification of cookies, but actually governing what's happening from each consent mechanism, persona-based profiles. How are you testing your CMP from, say, you're a California resident with GPC enabled? What does that process look like? And are you violating any of the consent mechanisms that you've created here? But from a defense perspective, everything starts with website scanning. Understand what's actually happening across your domains here. What's firing with no consent mechanism? What are all the scripts, cookies, pixels, tags across your website? And effectively categorizing these. Miscategorization, again, can expose some compliance risks here. If you have targeting your analytics cookies tagged as essential across your page, so there's no opt-in, opt-out function across that. So truly understanding, and I can't reiterate this enough, what are these cookies doing and what is their purpose across your website, across the board. On the right-hand side, if we look at the tag manager, so for those clients who are using tag managers for managing all of their cookies and scripts across their website, or for just handling a subset of cookies and tags and pixels across their web properties here, understand what goes into their tag manager and what the governance process is across the board. Who's checking tag manager to ensure that cookies are being tagged appropriately, that the CMP is connected back to your tag manager? So anything net new that is being added is effectively controlled. Again, oftentimes you see marketing teams adding new scripts and tags, et cetera, to the Google Tag Manager. But unfortunately, that governance muscle in terms of updating the CMP aren't running in parallel here. So that little bit of disconnect, again, unintentionally increases some exposure from a regulatory perspective across the board.
Yeah, we had
What
a
we always
question
say,
about really quick about any
please.
regulator who's explicitly criticized use of Google Tag Manager. Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, there's been several issues regarding the use of pixels, particularly the meta pixel, and I don't know if I think it really matters whether they use Google Tag Manager or not. If the pixel is acting in a way that it's against the law, then I think that that still applies, right?
To a degree, yes. From a Google Tag Manager perspective, what we've seen in the past couple of weeks here, coming out of Germany, specific to data transfers from the US and the EU and all the things that are topical with the Department of Justice right now. There's a lot of focus saying that Google Tag Manager cannot fire without explicit consent from a GDPR perspective, or just looking at Germany. I don't want to misspeak here. But again, the focus is around data transfers on that side, really kind of underpinning the concern for a Google Tag Manager being fired on that end. We can provide some follow-up information after this as well.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, let us know if you have any more questions throughout the session.
Awesome. Oh, very good. We will continue on here. So from a pragmatic and kind of practical perspective here, what goes into setting the groundwork from deploying a CMP and standing up kind of cookie and web governance across the board here? One, leverage the right scanning solution across the board. There's a lot of tools out in the marketplace. I call it shiny object syndrome. You're trying to attach yourself to the best UI, the best UX, what tool works the best here. Each tool is a bit different. Tools like Privado, specifically, it's not just the scanning that's being done, but understanding what information is being collected from each cookie, tag, pixel tracker across your website here, and tracking policy violations specifically for once the tool is deployed. If cookies are miscategorized, automatically alerting you. So taking the governance step a bit further in terms of where those violations are, as you're looking at CCPA, you're looking at Connecticut, you're looking at EU regulations like GDPR here. Again, those actionable prescriptive insights help dictate the next actions for your team versus going on a fishing expedition trying to figure out what's missing, where the disconnect is here. We know something's off, but again, without that prescriptive approach, it leads to additional exposure across the board. Identifying the technologies across your website here. This can be difficult to a degree. A lot of teams, one of the most toughest actions we face when we work with clients is identifying exactly what these cookies and scripts are doing. Now, a lot of the technologies will identify these up front, but some first-party cookies, tags, scripts, pixels, etc., need to be identified by the internal team or the client team. Perhaps they've created these for a unique use case. Again, some specific marketing aspect on their side here. But again, understanding what these are. And then to the right, how do we categorize these effectively? Are these essential? Are these non-essential? How granular do we want to get with our classification across the board? Again, all comes into play and kind of underpins a strong program on this side. Experience. The experience matters on this end. So how you set up your consent categories. Is a banner present? Is a banner persistent, requiring user interaction? How far do you want to pivot from a risk and compliance perspective here to land on the right experience to where marketing is still happy, but you're protected from a regulatory perspective? Again, sometimes the law dictates what you can and can't do, but sometimes there's interpretations on the US side of what type of experience you want to present on the side. Documenting your data flows. So what actually happens with collection of information from some of these third-party cookies? Who is this being passed to? How is this being shared? Is it just IP address? Is it user analytics? Is there any SPI being collected here? In that event, of course, you have to rethink your consent mechanisms to require explicit consent, or is there children's data involved here? There's a lot of considerations that go into this as well. And lastly, from a notice and transparency lens, updating your privacy policies and your cookie policies effectively. Who's maintaining these? Who's updating these policies to reflect the latest trackers, scripts, cookies, what's happening across the website here? So this is a full circle type of defensible approach when it comes to implementing an effective CMP solution. If we shift over, tag managers themselves. Tag managers, again, the source of a lot of challenges for clients today. And we've talked and highlighted a couple of these areas already. Generally, I'd say from a best practice perspective, build process around how new tags, scripts, and pixels are placed into your tag manager and how those are being fired out. Privacy involvement, keeping that cross collaboration between privacy, marketing, legal teams, et cetera, just prevents and creates a defensible ecosystem to defending compliance across the business itself here. Build a process to where you're maintaining review processes throughout your tag manager. Who's actually doing the review? Who's actually mitigating any rogue tags or scripts that are being placed on the website here? Your tag manager and your web CMP need to be in line with one another, running parallel on who's managing who to effectively manage consent and not leave that compliance gap across the board. Global privacy control, kind of shifting over here to some of the more tactical items that we're seeing. This is one of the most, again, I'd say topical items we're seeing in our conversations in the past couple months. You're seeing US regulators call out opt-out preference signals, or UOMs as well, universal opt-out mechanisms, which GPC can be classified as. And we're seeing this across new state laws that are effective, like Connecticut. We've seen this in California. You're seeing this in other states as well. But oftentimes the CMP configuration, when you deploy your privacy tech, unintentionally isn't acknowledging a GPC signal. So there's a number of ways you can go through and test this using tools like Privado. Once more, you can automatically turn on that persona or that path to validate how consent's being recognized, with GPC being one of those signals that it will look for to pick up here. My tip, whenever you check for global privacy control on this side, notice that Chrome itself does not have a GPC signal built into the browser. You can download a quick extension here. I think it's Global Privacy Protector, Control Protector is one that we use. Very quickly, you can turn on. And as you go to websites and check out the cookie banner, what's being fired, if Google or the GPC signal is on, you should be automatically opted out or respected on off how that banner and cookies are being fired here. So very easy to test, but we are seeing clients receive letters, unfortunately, from enforcement agencies or some of these plaintiff attorneys where this is being looked at across the board. Very quick check you can run across your website today would take you 2 minutes to do so. OJ, maybe I'll turn to you. I know this is a topic that's come up quite a bit, and you and I have had this discussion, but Google consent mode. What is it? What's the impact? Maybe walk us through this.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dan. So in simple words, I guess consent mode is just a consent signal for Google tags and services. When I say tags and services, think Google Ads, Google Analytics. These are flags that indicate permissions that the user has given uh, to these Google tags to process storage, permissions to show personalized ads, permissions to process advertising user data. Now, how it actually works is that these tags behave differently based on what consent has been granted by the user. Now, the behavior adjusts to what the choices have been selected. The tags independently may drop different cookies, store certain data, load more scripts depending on what was the exact consent values. Interestingly, unlike many tags that you block or load depending on what the user has consented, by design, a lot of Google services do not disrupt your analytical and modeling services. The way it works is because these tags adjust their behavior depending on your consent. You may still be able to use these analytics and perform modeling using these alternate limited signals, which do not actually track the user, but limit the data that is being transmitted. And without actually tracking user, they can give you these models. So you will still be able to use those APIs, but while you respect the user's consent. Now, I think since we have added this policy in Web Auditor, and of course, examples of this we will see a little later, we have noticed frequent violations of consent mode across websites, even for many websites which were otherwise very compliant. Users and teams, I guess, Dan, just like you suggested, often assume that CMPs will handle this automatically. So now the tags are often added directly by the marketing team through tag managers, but they miss out connecting the CMP values to these various tags, which thereafter populate the consent values for consent mode.
Yeah, I think it's a great point here. And again, I think my big takeaway for us, OJ, is that it's unintentional, oftentimes by teams overlooking some of these activities. But again, something to keep your eye on, and I think will be exciting to see in the Privado solution. What we talk about next is really how do we strike the right balance? Listen, on the consulting side, we work with hundreds of clients on our end. I've seen clients over pivot in a big way here, interrupting experience, interrupting kind of what marketing is trying to accomplish and driving campaigns. There's real dollars tied back to what marketing is doing and how those analytics drive product, services, go to market, third-party agreements they have downstream here. You have to take that in consideration and strike the balance from a compliance perspective, user experience, and expectations of the business. This cannot operate in a silo. The 5 items we always talk about, well, I just highlighted user experience matters. How is your banner being presented? No banners, a persistent banner. What's the design? What's the experience of a preference center? And what can you do inside of that preference center? I'll tell you firsthand, I've seen some notices from enforcement agencies on our side working with clients to where the language inside of the preference center may be off just a little bit. It could be very nuanced, saying use this switch here, but there's not a switch, there's a toggle. And I've seen that explicitly be called out that the language needs to run parallel to how the preference center is configured on that side. The technical components, we've talked about this a couple of times, but things like Google consent mode, GPC configurations. If you get into the world of advertising or first-party advertising and active bidding on websites here, there's a whole new world on how you're passing consent with US privacy strings or GPP strings downstream and validating these activities here. So again, this can be very complex across the board, depending on the construct of your business itself. Legal requirements, of course, consult with your legal team. What gives you the greatest protection on your side while balancing that experience with your user base, your consumers, leads, focus on how you're going to market on this side here. And of course, folks are always looking to add trust, as we say, behind kind of their their global brands on their side as a competitive differentiator. It's an expectation today. I think we all know this across the board. The last couple items I'll touch on here, OJ, before we turn to you. Consent interface design. What does this look like? And we've seen a lot of this called out from recent enforcements across the US. Equal visual weight. So really what we're talking about here is symmetry of choice. An accept all, a reject all button need to be present, both in the banner as well as inside the preference center for the users. Granular control. Again, how do you bucket? How do you categorize? There's some flexibility on the side of how your business chooses to operate. But again, clear, consistent design with the proper configurations and categorizations in place. Clear communications. I can't stretch this enough or stress this enough, excuse me, but clear communication. Your notices, the transparency, what you're presenting, language matters inside of your banners, inside of preference centers, your policies, which actively need to be maintained and updated across the board with any changes happening on the back end with the introduction of new pixels, tags, scripts, or any kind of third parties that are now being injected into the site for data transmission on that side. And lastly here, how do you monitor performance across the board? I see a lot of clients go through things like A/B testing, striking a balance with the banner and compliance obligations with user experience. So there's a number of key takeaways here. Obviously, a lot more in depth we can get into from a technical aspect in addressing some of these concerns, but I'll pause here. OJ, if we'd like to switch over to you, we can go ahead.
Yeah, let's just do a quick stop for questions. There's been a few good questions asked in the chat before we move on to OJ's quick demo of Web Auditor. So, yeah, Dan, I don't know if you've had experience with this. So a couple questions around, one was around Google Tag Manager and implementing it server side. Another was any issues around consent with website chat functionality like intercom. Are there any particular pieces of advice you have on those two topics?
From a chat perspective, we see the chat agent come up quite a bit here. Oftentimes terms of service or there's an implied I'm not a lawyer, so this is not legal guidance, just to be fair. But using a chatbot on this side, if the consumer chooses to interact with the chatbot here, perhaps some notice that clients are presenting inside the chatbot, and by proceeding, you can continue talking to our team for support there. That consent can be captured if that's an explicit consent that's been given. There's tooling out there, and Privado does a great work of this where you can capture the consent record tied back to the user as well. Google Tag Manager, from a server side perspective, we've seen this a few times on our end. I think this is a deeper conversation getting into the technical aspects of managing GTM server side, what some of the key call outs there across the board, but happy to take that conversation offline.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. All right, OJ, over to you.
Right, let me share my screen. All right, hey guys, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Perfect. All right, so I'll get right to it. Web Auditor. So Web Auditor is basically a tool designed to replicate real end user journeys on a website and then monitor what actually happens in the back. Let's take an example. So a user comes on the website and denies consent. Now Web Auditor helps you answer questions like, are there any cookies dropped on the website? What are the third parties loaded on the website? Who loaded this third party? Is there any data being shared to those third parties? Is everything happening with consent? Are consent signal across these different specifications correct? Is my website compliant across different regions? Are there any issues that are identified on the website? How can I fix these issues? And many more of similar questions. Now, as a Web Auditor user, adding a new website is pretty simple, right? I can just click on add new website, enter these bunch of details, select the regions that I'm interested in, and that's pretty much it. If I am a global organization, I would be interested in regions across multiple different regulations and laws. So perhaps I could select Germany or UK or California, right? And then I click on scan, and that's it. That's how you really add a website in the system. Now we have definitely seen organization add thousands of websites using this bulk import feature here, and then it just all of them together, and they have reliable, replicable issues for all thousands of those websites within a couple hours. Now, if you care about scanning not just once but multiple times, you can definitely come here and set a cadence that you want, perhaps weekly, monthly, quarterly. We often advise teams to set up a weekly cadence so their website is updated on a weekly basis. If you want a great, beautiful report of a summary of what's going on in the list of those websites, you can turn on these weekly emailers, which will give you a similar sort of email. This can also be sent to external stakeholders. Those are outside the Privado platform. Now that we have our website in scanning, let's understand what this actually means, right? So what happens here? So what actually happens here is the tool launches an automated browser in the background. It opens up the website that you have added from the regions that you just selected. It performs various user consent journeys and then collects and evaluates everything that is happening on the page, right? So it would actually, if we have selected Germany, it would actually navigate to the website. It will identify the consent banner on the page, perform the deny action, and monitor what is happening on the page. If something is not in consent, or corresponding issues created. If it's California, it would actually set the GPC signal, something that can be set using an extension like this on Chrome and comes inbuilt, enabled in a lot of browsers like Mozilla. And it would actually replicate that signal, go on the website, and then see if it's honoring that consent signal. Now we will move to these results in a minute. As you move into the results, the first thing that you see on the web, in the results is this dashboard. This gives you a trend of whatever was identified in your website historically. So we have issues, third parties that have identified on the website, data elements, which are the actual data that was being shared to those third parties, any scripts that were loaded on the page, cookies that were dropped on the page, and any storage items that were set by these scripts on the website. These trends are often handy for organizations to share across to see how their website have trended over a period of time, how their scripts have increased, how their issues have went down, how their issues have been resolved, right? As the issues get fixed, you would then see another green graph pop up here, which is very handy for our champions to go back and share in their organizations. Here we have a bunch of breakdowns. For example, this one gives a breakdown by category of the third parties that were loaded on the page. In this case, you could see that 22% of third parties are from advertising. What is the location or hosting location of the third parties that were invoked from the page? Now, this is something very dynamic in nature, but we actually identify the hosting location of the network requests that were being made from the page. And with each scan, show you the breakdown of these locations of each third party that were loaded on the page. Now let's quickly look at storage, right? So storage is all the local storage and session storage items that get set on the page by various scripts. Cookies, which is often the root cause of a lot of regulatory fines. We have a complete inventory of cookies that were dropped on the page. We have the cookie name, the cookie domain, what is the data categorized that was in the value of that cookie, right? So you can actually see that value, and Privado helps identify what that data actually is. Is it a random UUID, or is it someone's consent preferences? Is it a security token or a session ID? We have categories of these cookies which are set in the CMP banner itself. So what this really helps you identify is see what are the categories for each corresponding cookie. Do I have any cookies which are not categorized at all? or do I have any cookies which are actually misconfigured? Is there any targeting cookie which is apparently set as a strictly necessary cookie? One interesting thing and one thing that our users often drive their remediation by is the source here. So let's look at this example, right? So the cookie underscore TTP has a domain of privacy dark patterns, which was the website that I scanned. Despite that domain, which is shown in the cookies tab when I go in the website, the cookie was actually dropped from a TikTok script. Now, that script ties me back to the vendor TikTok ads manager, which Privado identifies and shows you in this unified view of all the cookies with their source and category and their vendor. Now, this is something very handy when you take this back to your teams for fixing. When you see this cookie on the website, otherwise, it is not clear if this is something that is, if this is a TikTok cookie. On the other hand, looking at the source here, it precisely gives you the exact script that was responsible for dropping this particular cookie. If you look at this cookie, we know that the source of this cookie is Google Tag Manager, which immediately tells you that the fix for this lies at Google Tag Manager. We have a bunch of filters which give you detailed pinpointed views of when and where was this cookie dropped from. So let's take the example of Germany again, right? So I want to look all the cookies that were identified from Germany. On top of that, now I also want to look at the cookies that were only dropped after the user rejected his consent. Here, it gives me a clear list of the cookies that were dropped from Germany, even when the user rejected consent. What happened when the user withdrew consent, right? So we again get these list of cookies, and then we see that, okay, there is a TikTok cookie, which has a source of TikTok, or Google Ads, which is being dropped on the page, despite its category not being strictly essential. So that's definitely a problem that I can take back to my team for fix and remediation. Similarly, we have third parties. Now, this is the list of all the third parties aggregated by the URLs and scripts that were found on the page. Let's look at one of these, perhaps Google Ad Manager. Now, this gives me a quick view of what all the data elements that I found on the page, that the tool found on the page, and were being shared with Google Ad Manager. There were multiple domains which are now grouped here. And if I am interested in looking at the exact details of those network calls on the page, I can open these code details and see the exact network call that was being shared along with any data that the network call also shared. On top of this, each request is also linked with a initiator chain, which helps you identify what is the script or what is the vendor, which in turn fired this particular vendor. So this is where these initiator chain often comes handy. We have data elements, which are again just the data that you saw here. It's aggregated for you here for you to filter and identify in a unified view of what data is shared to each of third parties. We have all the scripts that were loaded on the page. And then, of course, you can filter these by countries, actions, and when was this first discovered on the website. Now, before we move into issues, which is often a critical bit, I want to talk about policies that Privado has. So Privado has a pretty robust policy engine. All the discovery of these items like third parties, scripts, cookies, storage that we find on the page goes through this robust policy engine, which is 100% driven by our very demanding and amazing customers who have helped us build these policies with real controls that matter to legal and privacy engineering teams. Looking at one of these examples, opt-in consent compliance, we can see that this has 11 controls. Now, depending on your requirements, you can actually enable, modify, and even configure the issues that are created from these policies. Add different kind of remediation and guidance according to your organizational policies, and have these policies applied on top of the inventory that is discovered by the tool to create issues that you can then triage back to your organization for remediation. Now, these are some of the policies that we have. Let's look at particular few of them, some of which that Dan also covered. Electronic communication and surveillance policy, right? So this policy actually looks for any recording tools that were found on the page and creates the corresponding issues for them. We have these unified view of multiple tests of all the policies and all the corresponding controls which were finally discovered on top of those inventory items, and all the violations can be tracked directly from here.
Thanks, OJ. Yeah, that was really good. Quick overview of the tool. There's a lot more we could show. We plan to show in our next session on June 26th. Just before we wrap up, I wanted to quickly try to answer any questions. So yeah, we talked about, there's a few questions that were in the chat. One about getting access to security related team members. And yes, we can, this product is meant to be used across different teams, and access can be provided accordingly. Another question was about getting data information, not just data categories, but this tool will track particular data elements that are shared to particular third parties, and you can see what's being shared based on each consent action, whether it's accept, reject, no action. And then also additional tests can be run, not just when the page loads, but you can see, pre-login, post-login, and run different simulations to see what data is being shared when, make sure that it is in line with your policies. Those were the ones that I saw quickly. If you have any other ones, feel free to add them in right now. Let's see. Yeah, so those are all the questions I see. Feel free to, oh, we have another one just came in. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just wrap up now. Any other questions we'll try to answer after the webinar. Thanks for your engagement and attendance here today. We'll definitely share the slides as well as the recording, and we're happy to continue the conversation. Yeah, one more thing. You can request an audit of your website for free. We'll run the scan, and we're happy to go through the results with you to explain what they mean. And then it makes sense. We can see if it makes sense to do additional scans down the road. I'll throw the link in the chat right now. But overall, thanks everyone for your attendance here today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, OJ. You guys did a great job today. We'll see you next time.